speakers presenting today. We unfortunately will not be having Roy Kwan be presenting with us, but we have several papers that I think are absolutely great. So without any further delay, let me go ahead and present the first speaker, Dr. Gene Anderson at UC Riverside in the Institute for Research on World Systems, who will be presenting on China's environmental problems continued.
Sorry. His computer bag.
Oh, that's no problem.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. 2 years ago, when the meeting was here, I presented on China's environmental ruin, and it's a drag on China's recovery. At that meeting, there was a lot of attention to China as possibly the world's next hegemonic state, and I kind of pointed out it can't happen because China's ecologically destroying itself and will face economic collapse in 20, 30 years. So, sort of an update on that, kind of giving all the new stuff that's come out, that's crossed my desk since 2012. And one thing that's, I think, the most clear thing, which even the Chinese are scared about, is that farmland has declined. Farmland is, China has lost 25% of its farmland since the peak in the 1960s to erosion and desertification and urban sprawl and pollution. A lot of China is so polluted that you can't farm it. So Seto and others pointed out that China may triple or quadruple its urbanized land area by 2030 from about 80,000 square kilometers in 2000 to perhaps 300,000 in 2030. This would require spending $100 billion a year just to keep up with the infrastructure. But what's more to the point is that it means if they keep urbanizing at that rate, China's last farm will disappear about 2,200. At least this is better than California, which before the housing crash of 2008, if you look at the speed California was urbanizing in the 1990s, our last farm would have gone under in 2050. Scary fact. Meanwhile, global warming is seriously impacting crops. Rice pollen dies when the temperature passes 37 degrees centigrade, which is now happening in southern China. Agricultural policies are devastating. China's farmers are not making money. Rural incomes are stagnating. More and more people are moving to the city. Ian Johnson, in 2014, who's one of the very best commentators on the modern China scene, gives a recent update on this. Rents are high, profits low, government still constrains and controls what can be produced. Grain is very unprofitable. Three leading Chinese academics recently published in Nature, the world's leading scientific journal, a scathing indictment of urbanization policy. One can do no better than quote them. Quote, in the past decade, the urban buildup land area in China has grown by 78.5%. About half of urban growth has been at the expense of arable land, and it's usually the best land, raising concerns about food security. To curb the loss of agricultural land, the central government has introduced strict regulations, but these have had adverse consequences. In a desperate search for non-agricultural land to develop cities have reclaimed wetlands and lakes and converted pristine mountains, leveling whole mountains. At the same time, developed land is not being used efficiently. Attention quickly shifts to the next project. Illegal discharge of industrial wastewater, which contains heavy metal and other pollutants, has caused some 400 cancer villages in which cancer diagnoses and death are sometimes 20 to 30 times higher than the national average by et al. 2014. The authors note that Wuhan has lost 70% of its lake area. It's by a formerly famous lake. The rest of the lake is so polluted it's just a sewage pond. They outline a number of remedies, some being tried, some visionary. The process of urbanization could be controlled, though not reversed, but it would take a political reversal that seems most unlikely at this time. The pressure is on to urbanize, as in the U.S. Measure of China's land use planning is the summary expulsion of less affluent people from their land to make way for development that profits local business people. This is often a measure of desperation. Local governments are overextended, poorly funded, and must displace people and put up skyscrapers to meet operating costs. But often they send out gangs of thugs to do it. They beat residents who object. A revealing case involved a gang of 7 attacking a home of Shen Zhenjiang in a small village. Unfortunately for them, he was a kung fu master, and he and his sons quickly reduced the 7 to a crumpled mass on the floor. However, he and his son had to flee the town. His son was jailed. His wife had videoed the episode, and the video went viral all over China, but didn't stop the development. So people are being driven to the city. Meanwhile, some 3.3 million hectares of land are too polluted to use. The Chinese government wants to keep at least 120 million hectares of farmland. That's that 75% of what they had in '66. Anyway, they're down to 120 million now because of desertification, erosion, and pollution. For the record, China had 80 million hectares of land under cultivation in 1600. So they doubled their cultivated land by the 1960s and then dropped back to only 50% more than they had in 1600. Anyway, 6.1% of China's soil was polluted, including 19.4% of farmland. 10% of forest land is polluted to the point where it's seriously damaged for production. 10% of the grasslands, 11% of other unused land. 82% of these polluted lands contain heavy metals and other non-organic toxins, which won't break down. They're there forever. China consumes nearly 1/3 of the world's fertilizer. Pesticide usage is 2.5 times the world average. These figures are from Chen et al. 2014. There's over 5,000 urban brownfields. Most of this will not be renewable. It's gone. Skipping over some more about the heavy metals. As far as water goes, fully 90%, quoting Science magazine, 90% of China's shallow groundwater is polluted. An alarming 37% is so foul that it cannot be treated for use as drinking water. An estimated 190 million Chinese fall ill and 60,000 die each year because of water pollution. According to the World Bank, such illnesses cost the government $23 billion a year, or 1% of China's gross domestic product. You see why I don't think China's economy is going to go very far. Shale gas extraction by fracking is now contaminating more of the groundwater. Yes, they have fracking there too. Polluted groundwater used to irrigate crops is causing the crops to become toxic. Some 36% of rice grown in Hunan province was found to have cadmium levels above those specified by China's food standards. Hunan is one of the rice bowls of China, and cadmium causes horrible pathologies. It's what Aaron Brockovich got so famous for exposing in the Central Valley. Excellent plans for improving water quality are coming out of China, but these plans are more significant for the disasters they reveal than for the chance that they may get anywhere. The current political regimes will not even look at them. Tao Tao and Guilin Qing report that nearly half of 634 rivers, lakes, and reservoirs tested in 2011 failed to meet drinking standards, which are already pretty poor. The cities consumed 44 billion tons of water in 2011. There ain't that much water. China's most recent fad in earth moving is flattening whole mountains to create more level land for urbanization. Of course, one cannot flatten a high rocky mountain. The ones leveled are largely steep loess hills in interior North China, but leveling they are. And the Chinese authority, the Chinese scientists are urging the government not to do that. China's air pollution is the worst in the world, causing enormous damage to crops and forests not only in China itself, but in parts of Korea, Japan, Russia, and elsewhere that are downwind of China, including California. The World Health Organization estimates that some 700,000 people die from air pollution every year. The World Bank estimated that in 2009, China lost $100 billion from ill health. The truth may be worse. The Harvard School of Public Health estimated that 83 million Chinese will die of lung problems in the next 25 years. And Jonathan Fenby reports that outdoor air pollution is estimated to contribute to 1.2 million premature deaths a year. Cigarette smoking, meanwhile, kills 2,000 people a day. Since China's government runs the cigarette factories, that ain't going to change. The Chinese government deliberately encourages smoking, partly to keep the demography reasonable, which is pretty cynical, and partly to because they get a lot of money out of it. An 8-year-old girl recently contracted lung cancer, the youngest in China's history to do so. Of course, that was air pollution rather than smoking. In 2014, one village finally won a legal victory. A toxic waste disposal firm was forced to pay some compensation to about 400 villagers for drenching their environment with toxic fumes. It was too late for many who died from cancer. This is one of the many cancer villages. And meanwhile, cold, stagnant air continues to cause pollution. Beijing's air, of course, is famously hazardous. They just cleaned it up briefly for a big get-together, but when the get-together's over, things go back to normal. The life expectancy in China is now up to 75, which is an incredible achievement, considering that it was about 30 in 1949 when the communists took over. The U.S. is 79, India is 66, so India is nowhere near close to China. But life expectancy in North China is 5.5 years less, and in Beijing perhaps 16 years less, because of coal fire, power generating and coal fire heating for houses and so on. So that means 2.5 billion years lost if you add up all the number of people in North China. So the study, among other things, showed that particulate pollution from coal is much more dangerous than was thought previously. The Republicans just carried West Virginia and Kentucky so that they can keep burning lots of coal. Anyway, many, perhaps most animals are more susceptible to air pollution than humans are, so one wonders what else is going to happen to the rest of the stuff. Chen Wang, a Chinese expert on air quality, advocates a total cap on emissions and quick conversion to nuclear and natural gas, but of course it won't happen. China is now by far the major injector of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, most of it from coal burning, but a lot of it from methane from agriculture. China, meanwhile, is consuming more animal protein and using many imported soybeans to feed the animals. Meat consumption soared from 8 million tons in 1978, which was already a lot higher than in 1949, to 71 million in 2012, so that's a 9-fold increase. There has been a consequent increase in obesity, diabetes, atherosclerosis, and other food-related health problems. China will have to limit its consumption of red meats, fats, and oils, and sugars. The picture is not pretty. Through the 1970s, all Chinese had free health care. By 2000, only 15% of the population had medical insurance, and the rest had to pay full cost. The World Health Organization ranked China 144th out of 191 national health care systems. Of course, the U.S. is down about square, 15 of 100. Since then, things have somewhat turned around, but not, life satisfaction continues to stagnate. Stagnation tracks social, economic, and medical insecurity. China's economy is shaky in spite of growth. Timothy Beardsley, an expert on this, has contexted the environmental problems as part of the reason for economic growth not being even faster. But take note that China's vaunted economic growth of 7 to 10% is nonsense. First, it's based on figures that are known to be cooked, and second, it does not include any of this environmental damage. They just don't count it anymore in the U.S. does. We don't either. In regard to farmland, Chinese scientists have made major strides in winning more grain from less land. At present, if all their findings were put in practice, sadly unlikely, China could again feed itself from its mere 120 million remaining hectares. As it is, China is actually self-sufficient in grain and is exporting a little bit of rice. So they're doing amazingly well. This is due to incredible rice breeding science by Yan, the famous rice breeder. And more recently, these scientists are working on tailoring varieties to soils. China has set up markets for carbon release and otherwise gotten really serious about reducing its carbon footprint. It's moving ahead on air pollution. China has set up more than 130 local environmental courts. There's an environmental and resources tribunal. China has taken a strong lead in some aspects of clean energy, notably mass production of solar panels, also using a lot of water, wind, and other sources. The water power, of course, is dicey because that means they're building lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of dams, which have enormous environmental costs and which fill up fairly rapidly. So when if you lose a few, it's kind of, a friend of mine who's like the world's expert or the U.S. expert on this says, well, yeah, cost benefits. He's just coming out with a book on it, Brian Tilt. You want to watch for the book, it isn't published yet. And anyway, Chinese at all levels are now calling for better environmental management. Public transportation is a bright spot. There are good subway systems, good bus systems, and transit systems of that kind all over China now. Another thing is that they're doing some experiments with market-based bottom-up planning in some of the grassland areas where top-down communist management turned millions of acres of grassland into desert. It just does not work. But now they're beginning to pick up on that. There's some work on sustainable ecological agriculture in China, a couple of books by Tian Shi on that. And so in short, individuals are doing great things, ranging from criticizing the current paradigms to doing direct hands-on work with local people. A recent article chronicles a lifetime of work by Shishun Zhao to help local people restore what they can, damage done by mega projects and other policy-driven destruction. China has a relatively high number of self-sacrificing responsible citizens, and they have their effect. Unfortunately, they're subject to beatings, torture, jail, and quote, disappearance, unquote, if they come too close to local party interests. A recent study showed that if you are an individual activist complaining about what everybody's done to you and your family, you can get away with it. But if you start a mass protest, you're done, basically. That's where those bodies came from for that body show. Came to LA, which I wouldn't go to. China has finally made some strides toward changing its policies, in short. But progress is instrumental and slow. Minor improvements to China's environmental protection laws were recommended in 2011, adopted and watered down in 2012, but much were rejected in 2013. A plan for lowering carbon release into the air has been developed. The Communist Party adapted what for them is a genuinely radical new stance, adding to their constitution the idea of, quote, ecological civilization, unquote, meaning a civilization based on, quote, man, nature, production, consumption, harmony, unquote. In early 2014, the government renewed its commitment to cleaning the air, dedicated resources to this. A group from the Chinese Academy of Science, the Research Center for Eco-Environmental Sciences, recommended that the law reaffirm commitment to environmental protection and provide, quote, a strong legal basis for independent strategic environmental assessment and performance-based auditing, shift from regulation to governance. Government should work with local groups. Unfortunately, at current rates of change, China will collapse before much can be done. Repairing ecological damage or even slowing it down is a very slow process. Goes for the U.S. too, by the way. Economic lock-ins and rampant corruption are holding back implementation of even the gradualist plans designed so far. One major reason for China's failure is the extremely rapid growth of income inequality. Sound familiar? As Yuxia and Changzhou report, by now China's income inequality not only surpasses that of the United States by a large margin, but also ranks among the highest in the world. The Gini coefficient is above 0.5 versus 0.45 in the U.S. but it's higher than that. Much of this is due to regional urban-rural differences. Gini coefficient in China bottomed out at less than 0.3 around 1980, but has been rising rapidly since. Crossed that of the U.S. in about 2000. And recall that, okay, 5 minutes. Yeah, I can do it. Well, I'll have to cover that. All right. One problem with China's insane pursuit of a form of modernization that has long been recognized elsewhere as a hopeless failure. Government-driven, top-down forcing of heavy industry and extractive enterprise at any cost. The old-fashioned Western idea that any and all destruction of nature is good has surfaced in China and refuses to go away. Mao's famous struggle against nature. The trouble is, if you struggle against nature, you're going to lose. Nature may lose too, but you're certainly going to lose. Even traditional Chinese culture, with its love and sensitivity to the environment, is condemned in the worst of all terms. It's not modern. A recent indicator is documented by my friend Eric Mugler, who's one of the best anthropologists working in China. The destruction of the beautiful, poetic, moving funeral laments of the Yi people, and other groups too, because they're not modern. You're not like the most horrible trash culture that flourishes in Chinese cities. Anyway, that has nothing to do with the environment, but it's an interesting straw in the wind on what modernization does. There's a lot here on, which I will spare you, on what China does to protest, which basically means that they crush it. And I have lots of data on how thoroughly they crush it. But the meat of that is that China's riding a tiger. The more it needs to change, the more the old men who rule it fear that change, since change is threatening to their power. And the more radical the changes have to be, the more it threatens their power, and the less they're going to tolerate it. They thus crack down more and more condignly on dissent or innovation. And of course, the more they crack down on dissent, the more dissent gets radical and extreme. It's rather reminiscent of the Qianlong Emperor's similar behavior in the last decades of his rule, but the situation is far more extreme than in those days. As Jonathan Benby, who's one of the main commentators on China today, says, China finds itself at a watershed in which it needs to change, but knows that change will face it with the biggest test since Deng Xiaoping. China will not collapse just yet. Xi Jinping has just launched a terrific crackdown. Dissent and difference of opinion are savagely cut down. But on the other hand, Xi Jinping is no fool, unlike most leaders, and has made several fairly major steps to slow down economic growth. They may, however, just make things worse. Collapse will probably not come on Xi's watch. He's too ruthless and wily. But once Xi is gone, the situation will deteriorate. Global warming, continued shrinking of the land base, continued pollution will squeeze China into a vice. China's desperate attempts to secure food by buying up land abroad or getting agreements and sweet deals with exporters in other countries will increasingly fail as other countries in question reach their own limits. For instance, Brazil, which has skyrocketed its exports to China, will end fairly soon. Brazil is not only running out of forests to cut down and turn into soybeans, but it's also facing a Malthusian squeeze of its own as its population doubles every 30 years or so. Australia's farmland, Australia is another very major supplier of China, of beef and wheat and so on. Their farmland is being devastated by salt buildup due to their bad agricultural practices and by global warming. China's farmland has dropped by some enormous margin in the last 30 years, 20 years. When economic collapse does come to China, it will probably take the form of increasing repression, leading eventually to the country snapping, as the repression comes more and more in conflict with increasing misery. In previous centuries, this situation always led to one thing: anarchic violence, banditry, and warlordism. Maybe it'll do that again, maybe it won't, maybe something new and different will happen. But the world situation now, including China's, is not even remotely sustainable. When the crunch comes, the results will certainly involve mass violence and social breakdown worldwide. China, as the country most rapidly destroying its life support system, will be among the first to go. The end of the world is at hand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're going to do a Q&A right at the end.
All right.
Next is Mark Bird from College of Southern Nevada with 16 reasons why California ran out of water and a few solutions.
Okay, this is an update based on a magazine article from a few years ago. I'm going to pass one copy on this side and one on this side.
Pass those around if you like.
And I also have a water chapter, which is very similar to what I'm talking about in my book on 650 Laws in Sociology. And Alexis is going to enter my slides on the screen here. I'm not techno savvy, but he is. He's my assistant. I think I'm going to be up here. Okay. Two largest reservoirs in the state of California are Shasta and Oroville. That's the status of them. But the two most important reservoirs for California are not in the state. They are Meade and Powell. Meade has a volume about 5 or 6 times the volume of Shasta. So that's some pretty blunt statistics. This is one reason the governor of California in January urged everybody to cut water conservation by 20%. He was telling us that California has run out of water. But the reasons are multiple, and I'm going to cover some of the factors here momentarily. So we have this NASA study indicating that the amount of groundwater lost in a 9-year period is equivalent to 2 Lake Meads. So we're losing surface water, we're losing groundwater at dramatic rates all over the Southwest. And I like to put this up relative to global warming. You have 37 consecutive years in which the global warming measurement has been above average. That's like flipping a coin 37 times and getting 37 tails or 37 heads. So the probabilities are enormous that global warming is happening. Despite the public, 50% of the public tends to deny it or is not convinced it's happening. Okay, I'll go to my next page, please. So the reason California is running out of the water is there's this abundance of independent sources all happening simultaneously. And even some water officials are not too aware of the intricacies of these. So you have the growth in all the Colorado River states. All of them are growing. It's not just California. Before Colorado River water reaches Southern California, you have the other states using the water. Tourism leads to more people or tourists in Southern California and the Colorado River system, and there are people in California. So they're taking water. Some of them are, golf course users, et cetera. Some stay for months. There's a trend that people use more water per capita. They have a larger home, they have a swimming pool, they have a second car, needs car washes, third car washes. Those are all effects of water. The tree ring record is pretty clear. Going back 500 years, the tree ring record indicates that roughly there was 25% less water. Currently, there's 25% less water than what the tree ring record roughly indicates. This is what's called dendrochronology. Okay, then you have upstream states, particularly Colorado and Utah, pursuing diversions from the Colorado River to provide water for people in Colorado and Utah. If that happens, that water will not enter Southern California. You have energy development, oil shale plans along the Utah-Colorado border, proposed nuclear power plants, need a lot of water. Native American water claims. There are still some Native American tribes in the Southwest who don't have a legal entitlement to a glass of water. So they potentially are going to acquire more water in the future. The word drought is part of the problem. That's what the public hears. Drought is a temporary condition. Global warming is viewed as a permanent condition. But you hear that word drought and the public thinks it's going to be over in 2 or 3 years. That's not the way many other people view the situation. And as Gene alluded to, you have this phenomenon called global warming, and I like to relate that to the Colorado River system and the multiple ways it's happening simultaneously. So you have less snow being created, which means the upstream vegetation can take more water because there's less snow runoff. Okay, then you have less water entering about a dozen Colorado River reservoirs. And then you have greater heat occurring, meaning more evaporation from all the reservoirs. and over 100 lakes in California happening simultaneously. And then you have downstream farms needing more water because it's a little hotter. And then we have the urban heat island effect, that roughly 3 to 4 degrees warmer outside of big cities than on the countryside. Salton Sea, various people say it's in a state of dying. Well, one way to restore the Salton Sea is to put water into it. Salton Sea is a habitat source for about 400 bird species, among other things. Then you have in the coastal areas, you have people who have been withdrawing water from the aquifers, so you have potential of seawater intruding into the aquifers. And of course, that's going to compound problems to the degree that that's happening. I'm not up to date on the intricacies of that. And then the Colorado River Delta is dead. 0% of the Colorado River water hits the delta. So you have a major river, 0% of the water from the Colorado River enters the ocean. And as, again, Gene alluded to, you have salt impacts. If you have declining water, it means you have greater concentrations potentially of salt. Salt enters the farm system, and then you have less productivity in terms of crops. Then you have water speculators out there buying up water rights, which is going to confound the whole situation. And then you have the specter of litigation out there that any solution, there's going to be litigations, which is going to delay real solutions. And I think the number one loss factor is government neglect. The government hasn't intervened to address some of these problems. And by the way, this has been going on for a couple decades. So this is the cover of Time magazine 23 years ago, and they have the Colorado as the West lifeline is now America's most endangered river. So water experts know the situation has been developing for easily over a couple decades. There haven't been, the solutions haven't been really addressed. I'm going to ask, I'm going to move on to my next page here on solutions. How much do you think it costs for 15 gallons of ocean desalted water? Anybody want to give me an estimate? 15 gallons, what does it cost to desalt at the current low cost?
3,000?
2,000?
3,000.
3,000?
Just a guess.
Okay, another guess?
Gallon. 100,000.
$100?
100,000.
No, for
15
couple
gallons
bucks.
of water.
We're getting in the right track. This is incredible. People don't know. You hear about the high cost of salting. The correct answer is 3 cents. 3 cents. That doesn't count the health benefits of desalting. So the body is 2/3 water. Our blood is 90% water. So you have these dramatic benefits in terms of health. You have a benefit in terms of reducing prospects for war due to water shortages. You have the potential of, I made a graph of this, by the way, so it's 1 cent for 5 gallons. But if you consider the indirect costs, indirect benefits for 15 gallons of desalted water, I contend the cost is 0. 50% of the world's people live within something like 50 miles of the ocean. And then you have the benefits for low-income people around the world who are, carrying water by crude means like this, and it's probably as polluted water. That's where the real health benefits occur if advanced nations pursue desalting. they transfer over to the undeveloped nation. But before you get to desalting, the leading solutions, particularly in the U.S., are farm water conservation and urban water conservation. There's over a dozen techniques relative to those particular solutions. Under farm water, related to Gene's talk, there is currently about 50 billion gallons, billion, not million, gallons of the Colorado River water that goes to China. 50 billion gallons. It goes in the form of alfalfa. Alfalfa is shipped to China for China cows, so China's getting used to wanting more milk. It's roughly 75% of the water usage in California goes to farms. There's massive farm water conservation potential. Massive potential for water savings from urban users. There's also a way you can tie desalting in the future relative to conservation. The federal government can say, we won't fund a desalting plant unless you achieve 33% water conservation. Then you give people an incentive to do it and work out some cost arrangements similar to that. Okay, another solution for the 7 Colorado River states, which I think should have been done a decade ago before the reservoirs got so depleted. The federal government just unilaterally now could cut water deliveries to every state by 5%. And then let states try to figure out how to handle it. So that it would elevate over time Lake Mead and Lake Powell and ensure the water shortage there. When Lake Mead and Lake Powell go down, you have impacts on wildlife, power generation from the dams, recreation users, all sorts of benefits accrue as Lake Mead and Lake Powell go up, one of which is water quality. So if you have less water in the lake, you get worse water quality. You have more, the bad stuff goes down to the bottom of the lake. Okay, equally, the state of California could purge all water districts to cut water supply by 5%. Governor Brown could have done that. Maybe some of his advisors are considering doing something like that. Okay, I'm going to mention, I already alluded to some desalting trends, but there are a half dozen different techniques, all of which claim they can reduce the cost of desalting by over 50%. If these were combined, if the federal government pursued this, I foresee the desalting costs could drop by 90%. And again, you have this as the current cost. So there is a vast potential out there, particularly green desalting, which people are not too familiar with. You can use green desalting now to grow crops, particularly if it's a high-value crop and you have drip irrigation. So it can be used to grow crops, which not too many people are aware of. 50% of Israel's water, drinking water, is desalted water. They're changing, they're building other desalting plants on the coast of Israel to supply all the big cities in coastal Israel. It's currently 50%. So they're way ahead of the U.S. By the way, another benefit of desalting, it can be used as a lever to prevent international conflict. So relative to Gaza, the U.S. government and or Israel could say to Gaza, we will build you a desalting plant if you will achieve XYZ solutions relative to peaceful solutions relative to Israel and Gaza. So there's that benefit to desalting. I want to mention a few other countries, what they're doing. China, again, is finishing or went online this year a desalting plant 100% powered by wind. They're pursuing many other ones. They have massive water problems. But at least that's some initial attempt. They also have these gigantic plans to divert water from southern China to northern China. That's kind of all sorts of environmental consequences of that. And I think, as Gene alluded to, aren't going to be any simple remedies for China. Okay, SA stands for Saudi Arabia. So people think of desalting, they think of this 19th century or 20th century concept of desalting, which means oil power, and particularly relative to Saudi Arabia. What is Saudi Arabia doing? They're getting rid of oil-powered desalting plants. They're going to eliminate all of them. Their goal is by 2020 to eliminate every one of them. They're switching to solar. They already have one solar plant built, meaning it's 100% powered by solar. They have little solar, no, it's in one of those small Arab immigrant countries, I forget the name of it, who has solar plants to withdraw water that's twice the salt content of seawater to feed the Arabian ORYX species of oryx. Thank you. For a water supply for them, twice the rate of seawater. Okay, and then Australia is a leader in this too. Australia's first green-powered desalting plant, 100% powered by wind, was finished in '07. It was so successful they're building another one. On the other coast of Australia, they completed a couple years ago one of the largest plants in the world, which is probably the most green plant in the world, because it created like 500, at least over 200 acres of wildlife habitat. It also has the largest green roof of any building in the whole country of Australia. That is and it has trade-offs to reduce the energy trade-offs to reduce the cost of the desalting. Anyways, I look forward to talking with maybe more of you afterward. If you see me downstairs tomorrow, I'm certainly open to entertaining questions later. I thank you for your attendance here today, and I thank my assistant over here, Alexis.
Okay, and next we have Evan Huntley with Catastrophes, Visible or Invisible.
I've got a handout here which is one page front and back, so I'll just pass it around. And the handout is basically